Okay, we are ready to start our fourth panel. Thank you all for staying this afternoon. This is going to be a great 55 minutes, I think. I'm here to introduce Dr. Kim Morgan, our moderator today. Dr. Morgan has obtained degrees in geology, environmental engineering, and resource management, but he started his career as a professor at TCU in 1978. He has been the director of the TCU Center for Remote Sensing and Energy Research, and now he is the director of the TCU Energy Institute that works with 24 energy companies in the area. And he is hosting a symposium that the Texas Energy Council is going to help him with in the International Oil and Gas Focus in Fort Worth in September. Russell Gold from the Wall Street Journal will be one of the keynote speakers. But Dr. Morgan also has many published articles, but he also trains horses, and he is in a garage band called the Sump Pubs where he plays bass guitar. So he does have a life other than oil and gas, but we're here to welcome our last panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We have the best panel all assembled here for you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. And thank you so much. Yeah, I've been at TCU for a long time. Boy, have I seen the ups and downs of this business. That's 37 years of teaching freshmen to graduate students, working mostly with, my first career was with NASA Space Shuttle. I'm a remote sensing satellite geologist, exploration, getting into that business. Boy, things were running pretty good, and then it sagged again in the 80s and 90s, and then we had a big turnaround. Traveling with me so many times over here, also in purple, is Veronica Merrill. Veronica from the Energy Institute. And Veronica, I hired Veronica about 8 years ago to be my assistant. And in about 2 weeks, she was telling me where I had to be, how much money I could spend, and when I could take a vacation. I'd like to introduce my boss, Veronica Merrill. Veronica and I go all over, all the way from cities out east. We're going to St. Louis in just a couple of weeks. We go out to Charleston, Tennessee, New Orleans, just all over the place because it's from Texas. And people, when the price was high, people wanted to know what it was going to do. And then when it plummeted, they also want to know what the future is about. Matter of fact, to show you how it changes, about 8 or 9 months ago, we were out in Midland, Texas. I drive a natural gas car, a little Frogmobile. It's got TCU Energy Institute on it. We're out in Midland in VNI, and I pulled up to a stop sign, and I had to, on my dash, you know how it comes up and it says you have a low tire, air on the tire? So I get out of the stop sign, I would go around the car. Before I could get back in, I had 2 job offers to drive a truck in Midland for $100,000 a year. And before I knew it, Veronica was headed across to go get her trucker's license. We go back out there 3 months ago. Sure enough, same car, I drive up and that doggone light comes on again. So I get out of the car and I go around. This time when I got back in the car, I had 4 raffle tickets for a rig that they were giving away at the end of the day. It shows you how it changes. Can you imagine also in my job getting this across to the young people in this business? They've gotten so excited since George Mitchell and they went out and did the great thing of finding these shales. Matter of fact, I always carry around a piece of shale with me. This is the Barnett that I carry around everywhere for people to see. This changed everything. I was an associate dean at the university, because I'd been through being a chair and a great career, and I became associate dean. But I had to put my football helmet on and get back in the game once we understood, for good or bad, shales were the game. And that's become so interesting for us to get across to a younger generation. I like to get across the point that countries need 3 resources. Think about this, 3 basic ones: food, water, and energy. Think of any of them. Whether it's Europe, United States, Russia, how about Africa, right? Food, water, energy. Think of the problems you can solve or the problems you have if you don't have that. And in the United States, we got the food, we got the water. What do we still import? We import energy. And my whole goal in this younger generation is we woke up one day after many, many years. This didn't happen overnight. But George Mitchell and the team of geologists over there cracking the code for shales, and in our backyard we became, well, the Saudi Arabia of the world in natural gas. Our institute got visited this last year by over 20 countries. 20 countries came through the State Department to see what's going on over here and to get our take on it. And the biggest takeaway that they get is the technology it takes to get this done. Because when you come in and you find out and you come into Texas, let's say, and you go out to one of these sites, the horsepower that's going on out there, it's technology that has made this deliver these resources. What do we do with them? And that's something about the panel here. We've got them representing from Mexico all the way out from the East Coast, writing a book called The Frackers about what the heck has happened out here in this area. What does it mean to this country? And I'll add, what does it mean globally? These other countries, if we don't want to use it, they'd sure like to buy it. And last time I looked, we were about 18 trillion in debt. What do I tell youngsters now about energy? That we have no hope of getting out of this? We're only going to buy more and more? Or is there something we can do? So they put a stellar panel together for us, all of us just meeting today. And I thought what I'd like to do is, first of all, go down the row and let each of them tell you a little bit about themselves. Let's start at the far end for our international visitor, if you would.
Okay, my name is Adrian, as you can see in the leaflet. And well, I'm coming from the University of the Americas in Puebla, and I'm here to talk about the business opportunities in Mexico in the context of the energy reform.
I was going to say, wow, you have more energy than the Tasmanian devil. This is awesome.
Don't try this at home. I have to do it for a living. See, I got to keep freshmen awake.
Yeah, well, I don't do this for a living. I'm a reservoir engineer, which probably just put a few of you to sleep already, especially after lunch. But I'm with Cawley Gillespie and Associates. I run the Austin office, but we do reserve reporting, and we just went through a fairly tough reserve reporting cycle at year-end 14. A lot of challenges with the SEC price still being high, and also cost still being high. But knowing that rig count was dropping, knowing that PUDs were going to be a little more questionable, so it was challenging at year-end 14. And a little bit later, I'll talk about what I think is going to happen for year-end 15, since we're kind of looking forward in this group. But either way, it's going to be an epic 2015. So I'm excited for the future, but there will be challenges.
All right. Yeah, I'm Jack Rodden, RKI Exploration and Production out of Oklahoma City, and I am a Texan. I'm a transplanted Texan. I'm from Midland, Texas, and proud of it. But with that said, I barely escaped out of Oklahoma. As you guys know, the Oklahoma winds came, and in May we have a contest who can get in the cellar the quickest. And they did that at my house last night. But I did escape. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol let me escape out of Norman. I think I was about the last few cars to leave. But anyway, RKI, many of you guys and gals do not know RKI. We are a small E&P. We're in the Delaware Basin. Heard a lot about the Midland Basin. We're in the Delaware. We're a Delaware Basin player as well as in the Rockies. And in the Rockies, we're in the Powder River Basin. And to kind of give you an overview, we're about 28,000 barrels of oil per day equivalent. We're not a 200,000 barrels of oil per day equivalent like a Pioneer, but we're on our way. But in the Delaware Basin, we're very proud of that. My boss started the company in 2005, Ronnie K. Ronnie, and that's the RKI, are his initials. And I told him I would not steal too much of his thunder. He's going to be at Doug Permian in a couple of weeks, and so I said, well, I won't say too much, so I'll leave you, with enough information that you can engulf the group. Anyway, in the Powder River Basin, we're a big player. We haven't talked too much about the Rockies, pretty much about the Texas, but in the PRB, we're about 350,000 net acres. And at one time, early on, between Chesapeake and RKI, we had 1 million net acres between the two companies. In the last year, you may have seen the headlines. We parted ways with Chesapeake in a good way. They were able to cut us a check for about $450 million, and we liked that part. But anyway, we went to the north in the PRB, and then went to the south. And it's been, you hear a lot about infrastructure. In our business, it was brand new area where we had to totally put the roads, the pads, the batteries, the electricity, you name it. It was like the last frontier. And it was very exciting, having been in the business for 35 years, to see something like that and be a part of it. And you got to remember, about 5 years ago, our production was about 1,500 barrels of oil per day. So you take, 5 years growth, 28,000, 160 employees, it's unbelievable. And again, I haven't talked about the Delaware, but in the Delaware Basin, we're primarily in Loving County, Texas, state line area, Eddy, New Mexico, Lee County, New Mexico. Our well count total across the company, well over 600 wells. We're in about 1,800 wells total. So we're not a small mom and pop. We were at one time, and we talked about a lot about service companies. And early in the stages of RKI, we had to go beg people to work for us. And so those days are over and behind us. And so we're really excited about what is ahead for RKI.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Greg Zuckerman. I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, grew up there. I work in New York City, and I live in New Jersey. So what am I doing here, you're saying to yourself? So I work for the Wall Street Journal, and I write about finance and Wall Street. But it occurred to me a few years ago, about 2010 or so, that there's no bigger business story, business topic, business revolution than what's happened here in America in the shale field. So I set out to write a book about it. And the book is called The Frackers, and I'm going to talk about some of the themes today, but I'm here because of the innovation, the creativity, and the resilience of this nation, and the geologists and engineers and the wildcatters, which allowed me an opportunity to travel the country. So I went to North Dakota and Pennsylvania, and Texas, throughout Oklahoma, a lot of places in Oklahoma. A lot of the key guys were from Oklahoma and Louisiana, etc. So it's been a remarkable era, and I'm here to talk about it a little bit.
Sorry, I was just reading his book. See, I downloaded it, so I was just reading a chapter. I didn't like what you said about me, Greg. Honestly. He didn't mention me, but I wish he had.
Excellent.
All of my students, we have 400 energy kids at TCU. Any major, sorry, in my lecture hall, I don't need a microphone. Any major at our university, the students can do an energy minor. And I think it's good. We got kids that are journalism majors, communication, business. I get writing majors, those that are also into science and engineering. So one of the books they have to read is Greg's book. If you haven't read it, it's a must read. It is at our university. So I think that what I'd like to do is, we know, well, not too many weeks ago, the price was hovering around the low 40s, 45, 44. At least when I look every single day, and we all should, it's approaching $60 at least for West Texas, right? Intermediate. And so that change, I'd like to see what, not necessarily predicting, because that's really hard to do. We're going to see ups and downs, but at least getting up to 60, 65, how does that change the game back in? How can you win at the game? How can you make it work at 60 or 65, or can you? And some of you that are in this business, what do you think? Reservoir engineer, how about from your standpoint?
Oh, thanks for putting the pressure on me there. I think the story's been told many times, but we're a very resilient industry, and we've created some incredible technologies over the last 10 years that are going to continue to improve. And I think in a $65 oil world, we're going to be okay, because associated with that, we might get a little bit of movement in natural gas prices, so that helps. We're already seeing tremendous cuts in capital expenditures. There's Packers Plus being given away at cost, completion designs. There are all the various components that go into drilling a well and a completed well have moved down 20 to 50 to 60%. And so, with a $65 oil environment and significant cuts in capital, and then also the oil and gas companies refocusing their efforts, they're obviously going to probably focus in on the cores and, where they clearly think they have the best rate of return, because they will be capital constrained a little bit more than they were. I do expect some PUDs to be shifted out to probables because of the 5-year drilling window if it's an SEC reporter. But I'm not too worried. Maybe I'm naive, but I'm not too worried at a $65 oil environment, because there's so many other things that are moving in the right direction. So, the story's been repeated before, and I think it's going to happen again. We will come back. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me here.
Well, let me add to that as you guys jump in. But we're also, what would be nice if the economies of the world would pick up a little bit, right? Because some of it's driven by that, and we're just not seeing that happen. because we'd like 65, we might even like $70 oil, right? But we're seeing that we're not seeing much response from economies that also play into it. It's not just the U.S., right? It might be what China's doing, what's happening in Europe, certainly in the Mediterranean, some of the collapses we're seeing there. So as you look at this, that price for oil is driven by many factors now, right? And so if you have another comment, Jack, would you have anything to say about the companies, pricing?
Yeah, of course, being an E&P company, we're all about the econs, and when you do a shale play, you've heard it time and time again, the first 6 months where you're going to make all your money, and so as long as your processes are in place and you're refining on how you drill and complete wells, and you're getting better, those costs come down just because of efficiency, so that helps your economics. And then just, the overall, if you're in the core of the play, if you're on the fringes, your econs obviously aren't going to be as great. But if you're in the core where we feel like we are in both the Rockies and in the Delaware Basin, that helps your economics tremendously, especially if you have the infrastructure in place and you're not having to put in a bunch of pipelines to add on to the well cost.
Yeah, and it seems like then that getting it to market, having those markets close by would be helpful too, right? Because we can have shale plays or other kinds of plays, but if you don't have those markets reachable for your product, then that can really be a stumbling block for a lot of companies. How about in Mexico? I'm sure you feel the influence of what's happening to us and what it's done in Mexico for your economic stability.
Well, Pemex is not isolated from what's happening with the price of oil. It has also established some sharp, good spending, like around $6 billion. But the problem in Mexico is that a falling oil price has repercussions not only for the company, Pemex, but also for the government. 1/3 of government spending is financed by Pemex. So the fact that the price is around 50, 55 at the moment for the Mexican mix, well, it has a lot of implications in the economy. And also with respect to the energy reform, it's not the same to open up your sector when the price of oil is at $100 per barrel, and instead of 45, 50 in that range. So it has taken away the shine or attractiveness of the energy reform, but still at those prices, production costs in Mexico are quite cheap in relation to the price of oil.
Very good. Any other comments about it? I've got lots of questions. Anybody from the audience, before I move on with some of mine, that you'd like to direct at anyone? We'll come back to you in a moment if you don't have any right now. But anybody got a question? Okay, so if we take a look, and we're almost midway into the year. I mean, it's May approaching June. What do you think will be the situation over the next? Well, we know a lot of companies are going to. The call is going to come. They've been stretching it out. They've been hedging. Hedges are about to fall off. Banks are going to get a little bit more jittery about that. So, what do you think the next 3 to 6 months will be along those lines? Because there's a lot of land that was bought up out there. So, in this market, we've coasted into now. We were able to absorb the 45 and move up to close to 60, but realizing hedging has been a help there. What happens now to companies as we move into the next 3 to 6 months? If you have any comments on it.
I'll take a shot. So $60 is a sweet spot. It's a perfect price for everybody. Shale plays generally can be profitable around 60, depends which ones, Permian, Bakken, Eagle Ford, a little bit different. But 60 is not a bad price, and the country gets to enjoy lower energy prices at 60. You know, it's not 45, but it's not 80 either. So it's a sweet spot. I'm of the view that we're going to have a lot of zombie companies in this industry. What I mean by that is there are a lot of companies that should go out of business. They've got way too much debt. They never really made that much money in the good times either, and they're surely not going to make much money now. And they should go under so that there can be consolidation and the bigger players will do better, the less competition, et cetera. But they won't, and that's because the hottest trade on Wall Street right now is energy. Everyone's trying to call a bottom. It's the hottest thing. A few years ago it was Europe. Everyone was starting a fund to invest in Europe. They thought they were being contrarian, but everyone was doing it, and they didn't really make that much money. They were too early, and only now is Europe finally kind of turning a corner thanks to easy monetary policy. Same thing with energy. Everybody, all the big names on Wall Street, Apollo and Blackstone, a few others are starting energy funds because they all think they're going to find a distressed energy company, pump in money, and make a lot of money. As a result, companies that should be going out of business, I would argue, aren't going to. They're going to be saved by all this Wall Street money, and there's a lot of Wall Street money because there aren't that many other opportunities in the economy. Fed interest rates are so low, they need things to do with their money. So as a result, it's going to keep these companies going longer. It's going to keep production a little bit higher than you otherwise would expect, and it'll keep prices a little sort of a lid on prices. That's at least my prediction.
Anybody else? That's a good take. I like zombie companies. I think
From
that's
Zuckerman, zombie from Zuckerman.
Yeah, I'll say a few words. Zombie companies scare me because I have to do their reserves, and that's challenging. And we've got companies at all different strength levels, from the zombie companies to some that are very strong, and I'm not real worried about their reserves going forward, but I'd really like, instead of $60 being the sweet spot like you're talking about, like 70 would be just a little bit better, because I think we're going to need to push to $70 to really kickstart some things that are just going to continue staying in that zombie zone if we don't go from 60 to 70. But we can survive at 65, but 70 would be a little bit nicer. And somebody in the audience said this to me, but I think 70 is the new 90. Because in a decreased capital cost environment, we can live with lower oil prices and a little bit of movement in natural gas. If the U.S. continues to, shift a little bit more towards natural gas, as well as the rest of the world, having both of those commodities a little healthier is certainly going to help us on a go-forward basis. I know it goes without saying, but I do think $70 is what we need to really start kickstarting the drilling again.
so somewhere in that 65 to 70, certainly 60 being you can play the game, and getting to 65 and 70 sweetens it. And I'm glad you brought up natural gas. Remember, I drive a natural gas car, and it's awfully cheap to drive. Even when prices have fluctuated, its price stayed right there. Even when it was high, it stayed there. All the way from, I think V and I up in Oklahoma would pay 80 to 90 cents a gallon of real gallons for natural gas to $2, $2.25, something like that. It's very stable, which yesterday I was at a conference about alternative fuels, and a lot of the big trucking fleets are moving to a stable price natural gas because it's very stable. They see it for the next few years, right? And it's much easier than maybe the fluctuation in diesel, because if it goes to 70, 75, 80, diesel's going to go on up. Natural gas is about $2.70 or so. We can play with the nickels there per 1,000 cubic feet. Are any of you in the natural gas business, or only the oil? You play gas?
We play gas. We're primarily oil. We're about 76% oil NGLs. But getting back to the price, I don't think it's such a waiting for the price to increase as much as it is to keep it stable. As we plan our business, 6 months ago we were looking at a $1 billion capex just for managing our business, and of course that goes out the door when the prices go south. But the thing is, if you can have a stable oil price, then we can plan our business and understand our development programs and what we can or can't do in our different fields that we operate in.
So do you think that there's a possibility? The landscape has changed globally, right? The U.S. stepped up to the plate, and that's really changed a lot of countries thinking about the United States and its productive power in oil. So do you think there is a possibility of having a term of time where prices would be more stable and not have too big a fluctuation? Can the oil game play a stable or more stable pricing?
That's a good question. I can't answer that. But I will say this. As fast as it went down, I do predict it'll go right back up as fast as it went. It's just, and it's more cyclical than ever before. And I guess because there's so many different driving forces that are engaged.
Yeah, and you must see that some in Mexico too, and your country is pretty dependent on the pricing, right, of the oil and Pemex and what it's doing. But you've had some changes in Mexico.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you might address
Basically, on the part of natural gas, you may wonder who is going to benefit from the gas revolution here in Texas, and the answer is Mexico. For example, this government is planning to spend 9 times more than the previous administration in pipeline infrastructure, and that's going to help productivity across a wide range of industries in Mexico. And I'm going to give you an example because that is providing business opportunities not only for private players but also for Pemex. Pemex now is actually articulating the natural gas ammonia fertilizer value chain. At the beginning you were mentioning that, and that's a link between energy and food, and that's something Pemex has realized. And probably by the end of this year, Pemex is going to put back to work a huge fertilizer plant in the south of the country, and that's going to help reduce food imports, because Mexico imports a lot of food. And around 43% of basic grains we consume in Mexico come from abroad. Why? Because we lack fertilizers. We don't produce fertilizers, and thanks to, I have to say it, cheap prices of natural gas in Texas, Pemex is going to be able, that's the plan, to articulate that value chain.
Very good. You know, I've noticed, and let's see if I'm right, that even though the price had this dramatic drop and it's stabilized again back up to 60, but production in the United States has continued to hold strong, as a matter of fact, go up. How do you explain that to the average person out there that is thinking about oil and productivity and the price dropped but production went on up? How did that happen?
Well, first of all, it's the backlog of our completions. We talked about it in the earlier sessions, and most operators are even in a shutdown mode as far as completing new wells. They're drilling wells, then waiting on completion, waiting for the commodity prices to improve and service costs to go down as well. We're a little bit different of an animal. Being a small E&P, we have elected to go ahead and complete. We never look back as far as activity, because it's kind of a time value of money issue in that we felt like the cost of the services were coming down. It's still coming down, but then again, you lose a lot of momentum when you start, laying down rigs and stalling out and keeping a lot of wells in inventory to complete. Lose a lot of that momentum that takes a long time to get back into that groove.
You probably have debt to service as well.
Right.
So, what about those companies that may be faced with holding back production? Do companies have to face that, if they've got land that they've got to do something with? Or what does a company do if it's faced with that, but yet doesn't quite have the resources to keep that rolling?
Well, obviously, you have commitments that you have as far as your lease obligations.
Right.
You have, depending on how the lease is written, you may have continual drilling clauses in there, and you have to keep a rig running every 6 months, something like that. And again, you just assess your inventory of leases and see how many wells you're going to have drilled to keep the leases active. And so it just depends on your cash flow, your balance sheet.
But correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's just the Permian where you have those kind of pressures, whereas the Bakken and the Eagle Ford, I think, most people don't have to produce. It's not anymore because they're older plays, they're shale plays.
Well, what you get into is a lot of, especially in Wyoming, you have federal leases. The BLM controls that. And what we did is we put together these federal units, and you may have 20, 25,000 acres in a unit, and you have obligations to the feds to keep a drilling program going and show commerciality. So, there are commitments, and we have commitments with the federal government to drill. The only issue is they can't issue the permits to drill. So you run into a gap there that you're dealing with as far as the BLM and getting wells drilled. And of course, you as a taxpayer, you're the one who loses on that, because the money generated out of those revenues you're not seeing, because the BLM is not permitting wells in a timely fashion.
Well, the pressure that those that know the game that we've put globally, because the U.S. stepped up, production came up, markets changed, the U.S. wasn't buying as much. With these prices and what we're talking about here, can the U.S. sustain being a player at the table of its production levels at $60, $65? Can it maintain the production levels that we've seen over the last couple of years as we've been growing? Do you see that? Is there enough money there? And Greg was talking about money being pumped into this, and maybe there would be some of these companies that shouldn't be, but is there an overall ability for this country to maintain those levels of production and still be, I don't know if you want to say a global threat, but a major player about market share out there? Any comments?
We should still stay around 9 million barrels, maybe you go to 8.5 potentially. I guess if things stay, 50 to 60, then you drop there. But that's a major player. We set prices at this point, and that's why the Saudis are scared of us, and that's why they want to, undercut the frackers.
It's such a complex question you're asking. There's so many things that go into that. The backlog or the frack log, when are those wells going to start coming back online? When will companies start completing those wells and feeding into the system to help fill up the curve on the back end and keep production stable? And then on a go-forward basis, how much capital will companies have? How many wells will they drill? Be able to drill going forward in some 5 to 10 year window? I think it's going to be significantly impacted. So the number of wells is probably going to be reduced over some amount of time. So that's going to hurt long-term production. But you mentioned it, the capital still seems to be flowing in from somewhere. There's some incredible capitalizations that went on at the beginning of the year that in the middle of the crash that I just couldn't believe that companies were able to pull off. So there's been money on the sidelines. Everyone knows there's PE money out there that's just been waiting to pounce for years, and they just couldn't get in on an expensive market. So that's good because, there's still money coming in and propping up some companies, but I'm worried about those zombie companies that are going to go under and others that are just going to hang on. And
Yeah, we saw Aubrey McClendon start a new kind of operation. Was that American Energy Partners or something like that, whatever it's called? And we had somebody in from his group to talk to us about it at TCU. And it's pretty staggering the money that they raised in a short amount of time, right? And so, as Greg was pointing out, money is being poured in, and you hope that they're good investments, but there's going to be a lot of bad ones too. But what does it do to the industry? Let's take Aubrey's operation. That is probably going to go into basins that they know will produce. So that's a lot of fresh new money shoring up a whole new venture into multiple basins around the country. It's just one idea, much less the companies you're with. So it looks like our production and our place at the table is here to stay. Would you agree?
Yep.
Now, you brought up the F word 2 or 3 times. My dad had a different F word. Fool is what he said if you're not careful with your money. But fracking. And so I oftentimes say, think of the youngsters I have in a classroom and their attitude about fracking from day one. And I have 1 semester to talk to them about it. And we can all have ideas and understandings about it. But there is obviously a campaign about anti-fracking. It's the root of all evils. And I'm wondering where you see this, and you're stepping outside a little bit of your comfort zone about what you do every day, but where do you see these kinds of discussions going? I'd like to finish with Greg on this because he gets a kind of a national picture from his perspective as a righty. One, is there much discussion in Mexico about fracking issues?
Yeah, there is a huge discussion in Mexico about fracking. It has proved to be controversial.
All positive?
Yeah. But the fact that the price of natural gas in the US is quite cheap, many people see that it's complex. It's going to be complex to develop shale reserves in Mexico due to the facility to import that natural gas instead of developing all the infrastructure around shale gas fields. And also, most of the reserves we were seeing at the keynote speaker presentation are in the north of the country, and that's a problem with access to water in that region. So it's going to be controversial to decide. Are we going to develop shale gas reserves in places where there is not, apparently enough water, and with the price of shale gas that cheap in Texas? So that's a big question that policymakers in Mexico need to answer.
Any of the others from some of the companies, what do you think?
Well, of course, being a petroleum engineer, I want to talk about the technology. I would like to address the fact that fracking is such an interesting piece of work that petroleum engineers get to work on, and I think we've just scratched the surface on where we're going with fracking because of just the technology breakthroughs. It wasn't too long ago we were all about sleeves, putting sleeves in laterals, and of course I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, and then we're perf and plug. So you have all these different technologies that have just opened up a new arena on being able to recover reserves. And that in itself is what the shale boom is all about too, is how much resource we've been able to produce with this new technology. And again, I'm so excited. When I first got into business in 1980, I didn't understand a lot of how we frack wells, and I still don't really understand a lot of it. So it's a very interesting science.
Yeah, at the university we now have 2 petrophysicists that we didn't have before, right, about busting and cracking rocks. Todd, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, just briefly, I don't think there's any going back. I don't think we're going to go back to days before fracking. It's too important of a technology, and it's unlocked rock that never before thought could produce the hydrocarbons that it has. But I still think we continue to refine it, you get the costs down, and use it responsibly. I think that our industry, for whatever reason, we've tried, but we haven't got the word out and educated the general public as to how safe fracking is, how much of the cost of fracking actually goes into safety and protecting the environment, and the casing they put in the wells. And it's just, that comes through visiting schools and teaching kids really young to understand that the oil and gas industry is not evil, and hopefully we'll continue to break down those barriers. But fracking is here to stay, and it truly, I'm excited in my lifetime to see this kind of a revolution between horizontal drilling and the combination, adding fracking with it. It's just been so powerful, and it's going to revolutionize other areas of the world, and it just is barely scratched the surface worldwide.
And now someone who wrote a book with the word fracking on it, so the frackers. Greg, if you would.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which of my main characters cut me off and stopped talking to me when he saw, about 6 months before the book came out, the title, The Frackers, and Greg, you're insulting the industry. So they're very sensitive. These billionaires are ridiculously sensitive. You'd be surprised. So I would argue that the conversation about the environmental impact of fracking in some ways is becoming a lot more intelligent. So early on, I think most people in America, their view was formed by a movie called Gasland. Raise your hand if you've seen the movie Gasland. Wow, a lot of people, geez. So when they turn on the faucet, light the match, and there's a fireball, right then and there, people were sold or convinced that fracking was bad. And people don't talk about that angle, which is methane getting into the water anymore, because that's really been disproved. We all know that methane most likely naturally got into the water in those places. There are 3 towns in this country called Burning Springs, because naturally the methane always got into the water, and the Native Americans used to light it on, match on fire. So so we don't talk about that so much, methane getting into the water. We don't even talk about chemicals getting into the water so much. People, I think at this point, most scientists have concluded that it's very unlikely, it's not impossible, but very unlikely that the chemicals can magically somehow go a mile up through the rock into the water table. So that's been a good thing. And we've been starting to focus on the real dangers of fracking, which are things like methane leakage, which we still can handle, but we cut back on, and we don't enough. And the Obama administration recently has enacted some new rules, which I would argue have been really helpful, and some states as well. So places like Pennsylvania, and they've come together, government and an organization called the EDF, Environmental Defense Fund. They've compromised with some of the producers, and they've come up with some new laws, and we can do things to improve methane leakage. And if you drive around North Dakota, this isn't methane leakage so much as burning, but it's beautiful at night. You see it, it's beautiful, all the fire flaring, but it's also kind of depressing because we're wasting all this natural gas. And there's more conversation, so it's a more intelligent conversation. That said, you still have things like Governor Cuomo in New York, who okayed a ban on fracking and natural gas and oil developments when he's okay with gambling in the state. So, which is kind of more I would argue, more harmful to people in that state. So you still have some areas of concern in the conversation too.
Very good, very good. Way to go down the line. Now, open it for questions. You've got some unique people up here. Anything that you would have before I go on? Any question anywhere? Raise your hand nice and big. Is there one in the back? Yes. Stand up and really shout it.
Hey, Greg, how do you see the value of the dollar, the direction of the dollar, and even price manipulation amongst hedge fund traders affecting the supply and demand issue and the price of West Texas crude?
It's funny, everyone on the East Coast and on the West Coast, they view the industry in a really poor light. They all think of the industry as sort of these double-breasted suit guys from Houston giggling their way to the bank as they kind of pollute left and right. And when you go out and talk to people, you realize that most don't wear double-breasted suits. No, but most are outdoorsmen. They're hunters, they're fishers, they're out of the office more than I am. I'm in my desk all day long, and so there's this view that's an incorrect one of the industry. Likewise, I think the industry, I think you kind of reflected, has this view of a hedge fund guys, evil hedge fund guys manipulate. There's no manipulation of energy prices. I mean, maybe short term here and there could be, but generally speaking, it's supply and demand. So I'm not as concerned about any kind of manipulation by hedge fund traders.
Excellent question. Another one before we go back to the group from here. Another question. Yes, right over here. Stand up and say it big.
Yes, throughout the day we've heard a lot about the impact of lower prices, commodity prices on employment, on the creation of zombie companies, the financial threats, etc. And I'm just thinking from a historical basis, if I remember my industry history well, way before I joined the industry, or after my father joined the industry, there was a thing called the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission that was created to support a level playing field in prices that administered at the state level, and it rolled out allowables. I'm just wondering what the panel thinks about that. Would that be a partial solution to the stabilization of oil field employment, stabilization of revenues for states and school systems, bridge funds, etc., and stabilization of our industry's employment and financial futures of zombie companies?
Are you guys familiar with the Compact Commission? It hasn't been as very active, see. It was at one time, and it's up in Oklahoma, if I believe. I've been up to their main offices. Do you have any comments on them? How much they might be doing? Are you thinking about, did you have something on them? Anybody?
No, I'm not.
Well, I mean, we talk about gas allowables. I mean, I can remember early in my career, I mean, there were a lot of contracts that were written real poorly. So I think if you did go down that path, you have to be real careful on how that's structured. And maybe that didn't answer your question, but when you say allowables, that's what I think of is low price contracts that lasted forever, and it really just put people in a bad position.
Well, I'm thinking of I remember when I transferred out to Midland, Texas in '82. That was my first introduction to Texas from my home state of Oklahoma. But we had allowables on oil and gas, and it was set by the state, and we were given a certain percentage of our allowable that we could produce. And sometime after we moved out in '82, Texas went to 100%, removed all the allowable restrictions. But it was a way of protecting the independent producers and protecting the state's interests. So just thinking about that.
Be an interesting concept if that had traction again, and it may. Something may tip it so that that would come back into play. It'd be an interesting see how that would resonate throughout the industry, what it would help. I'll just tell you, you just talked about employment. I've got to keep these young kids interested in this business. I was teasing before at all of our universities, SMU, TCU. I won't say anything about Baylor, but because they beat us last year. But we have a generation responsibility coming up on us from all this industry, and it's typically hired and fired, and I've been through all those cycles and been part of that over almost 40 years. But this young generation, we've got some people who are very excited about domestic energy, just excited about it. Now, it may be all forms of it, but including our own production of domestic energy instead of just buy. And I'm hoping that the companies can respond and look at internships at these times now. I was telling Greg earlier, we had a networking night just about 2 months ago, and we're hoping to get 50 companies, just 50. I pleaded for 50 companies to come to TCU to meet our students and encourage them. 250 companies came. So companies want to do the right thing. We are uniquely set this time with a lot of domestic companies in the driver's seat of all of this domestic production. Which leads me to wondering the panel's view, because I get out there a little bit with audiences, can we think anywhere down the line about really teaming up and making a North American alliance do what can come with Mexico and Canada as a North American energy alliance to strengthen what we do in this country? It is a country now with a lot of players, not 5 or 6, but a lot of domestic players. Can we stitch that together and do anything significant in a national way? And I wonder if you have a comment or two about it. Todd.
Mine's real short. I think we're down to 13,942 hours before we get into administration. So maybe that, it's definitely going to take some changes at the top to allow those.
Because my next would be what could be done to help that along. And I think that's what you're hinting at in a subtle way. Jack, would you have any comments?
You talk about internships, and that is so important. I can't say that enough, and you know that too. I gave a presentation.
You're so excited about them.
Yeah, I gave a presentation not too long ago, and I told the kids in the audience, and they were undergrad business school at UCO, University of Central Oklahoma, and I said, you have got to get an internship. You get in front of that potential employer and say you will work for free because it is so important. And again, that mentorship is key. And I know it served me well, and we're real high on it at RKI. We do a really good program with University of Oklahoma, and again, internships key. That's is huge.
And I think it serves those, if it's Oklahoma that gets them because that's your area, that's great. It's all over. We need more of them up in the Northeast, where we've got them up in the Marcellus and those areas to at least give them a good look at this industry, right? Because I can tell you they come in with certain attitudes, and those that work in this industry, they just love it that they got selected to be an intern. And every one of mine, they have to write an internship paper. Everyone has been really grateful to the company for the experience. Some of them coming from well-to-do families, but having to work on rigs, and found it was a game changer in their life to see how energy is really produced in this country and the importance of it. Greg, would you have any comments coming out of your part of the country about anything that you might see changing up there in the discussion about the youth and internships and employment in this industry as a whole?
Well, as you had suggested, it's a volatile industry that goes through these phases like the 80s and 90s when no one wanted to be in there. And it's sad, people again on the East Coast sort of resent the money made by the industry. And what I try to point out is the risk that's involved in finding all this oil and gas, and also the volatility that comes with it. And landman, look at that job. You make a lot of money, and then you're looking for work for a few years, and they travel, and it's a difficult job. So, I try to emphasize not to resent the money coming out of the oil fields, because there's a lot of risk and volatility as well.
Very good. Yes?
I was going to say, I've got a daughter in college right now studying petroleum engineering. She's a freshman, and boy, she's ready to come home for the summer. But, she's told me about a lot of kids who had their internships reneged on, and that, they're a little bit down about the industry. And, my fear is that, if we don't all do our part to keep them focused and get them through the next 4 or 5 years, because, the parents are paying for the education, right? And they want to make sure their child gets into the right industry.
It's about a job.
Yeah, and it's about a job, and it's like, you're going into a nowhere industry. Well, they have to know that, like you just said, it changes. and it's been through boom or bust cycles before, and I think we're going to be fine. And I'll just add one more thing, is that when I started college in '85, we had 110 that came in at the University of Texas in my incoming class. By the time I graduated in '89, only 11 graduated. So it was, you know, it was just incredible the how many people dropped out. It was about a 50% cut every single year, and we were in the middle of just terrible times in the oil patch during that time. And I'm very glad that I stuck with it, and some of my colleagues stuck with it. But I'm just worried about that happening right now and slowing down our kids that we need to come out.
Yeah, and they're so excited about it. I can just tell you, Veronica and I, we got 400 kids in this thing from all the different backgrounds, and every one of them would love to stay in this business. They hear how good it is. They hear you can make money. They hear that you can have a great career path, right, if you're very good at it. It takes no prisoners. If you're good, you'll get rewarded. So many of them like that idea, and I'm hoping that even as we paused here with the prices and stuff, that we still fire up, keep it going. We've got to invest in that next generation, or remember, they're going to be voters on policies and issues down the road, and we've got to keep them in a positive vein. So I hope we can do that. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, in Mexico, I think we should do something similar, because with traditionally speaking, we have only had company in Mexico operating, Pemex, and that's changing. And the problem is that not many university has programs for the oil and gas industry. So another field of collaboration could be like exchange programs between Mexican and US or Canadian universities, and to send Mexicans to the US to have internships and get a sense of what the oil and gas industry is.
We got visited by about 12 companies from Mexico that were the small companies trying to fight against Pemex, that's the big boy, but they were so excited about opportunities they thought that they could wiggle in and get their companies going. We need that diversity in Mexico, right? That'll be great for us. We're down to just a couple of minutes because I can see the clock. I don't want to, anybody from the audience? Yes, right there, a big arm waving.
I just want to ask sort of a different question so we can kind of look forward. But, given that we're now producing and we're in the game globally, so what happens to OPEC and what happens at the next meeting? And does OPEC pull apart science and technology in the U.S. or what?
Yeah, that's one of the questions that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering. Does this really impact OPEC? Does it really impact Putin and out there in the global scene? Anybody have some comments? Certainly they reacted. We'll have to say that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, OPEC's in trouble. They're under a lot of pressure. The thing is, the Saudis can handle it. So they've got all kinds of reserves, dollar reserves. But they also have a lot of pressure because they have a younger population than you would think, and they have to deal with those people. So they're under pressure, but they can handle it for a little while. And I would argue that's going to keep prices low for a little while. And Russia, you know, there's all kinds of pressure on Putin, but he doesn't seem to care about his people or about his country. So there's a lot of pain in Iran too. I would just kind of end that. It's hard to, one of the lessons from this whole era, I think, is to be skeptical of the experts. So be it about OPEC or about the future of energy prices. I mean, everyone in the industry kind of assumes 70 to 90, 70 to 90. Eventually we're going to get back to 70 to 90 because, of course, the world's growing and China's got a middle class, etc. And I've learned to be really skeptical because just like the experts got it completely wrong with this shale revolution and Exxon was sitting on the Barnett and didn't even do anything about it, and it took George Mitchell and some others to gamble on it. Same kind of thing. I think people aren't focusing on demand. I mean, there's this assumption that demand's going to kind of be strong and go on forever, but there are all kinds of changes going on. Self-driving cars, young people living in cities and not living in suburbs, people becoming more efficient, Chinese consumer becoming a little bigger, and the infrastructure build out and not as big a deal. So I wonder if demand's going to be as strong going forward over the next few decades.
Okay, we're down to, it's 50 seconds, they tell us. I'd like to thank these panelists. I think it was really good. Did you enjoy them down here?
Yep.
And of course, for our great hosts who've had us here today, for all the sponsors, and for a horned frog being over here at SMU, it's not easy all the time, but But we enjoy being here. Veronica and I are all over the state, all over the country, and we enjoy these sorts of conversations. I don't think this could have been better. Great input from all of you, and thank you so much for having us here and for you being here today, too. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give them a round of
Sorry,
applause.
I would like to say something. At the University of the Americas, we are well aware of the interest companies in Texas may have in Mexico. So we have developed a program, a training program for companies, for people that want to get into the energy sector in Mexico. And we have the capability to actually come to Texas and deliver the training course here. So if you need a partner, local partner in Mexico, for example, a way in, we could be your local partner.
Very good. Thank you so much for the offer. Thank you.
Have a gift for your life. They're more in back. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.